Skidmore, Missouri. To an outsider, it is the definition of the American heartland. Quiet, pastoral, populated by hard-working families who farm the land and rely on trust to run their small, close-knit world. But on a sweltering Friday morning in July 1981, this idyllic facade shattered when a crime of shocking audacity occurred right on the town's main street. It was a brutal act of homicide, carried out in plain sight, yet it remains to this day officially unsolved. This is the story of Ken Rex McElroy, known by everyone simply as the town bully, and the moment an entire community decided to issue a collective, silent verdict against him. The scene of the crime was outside the DG Tavern. McElroy, 47 years old, was sitting in his red Silverado pickup truck with his wife, Traina, in the passenger seat. He was struck down by a sudden hail of gunfire. He suffered fatal wounds to the chest, head, and neck. What makes this murder one of the most chilling cases in modern American history is not the violence, but the sheer number of witnesses. Estimates suggest a crowd of people, numbering between 30 and 60 residents, were gathered directly in front of the truck, actively watching the moment of his death. This was not a hidden crime committed under the cloak of night. This was a public execution, carried out in broad daylight. Yet, when law enforcement arrived, the community of Skidmore was transformed into a wall of impenetrable silence. Despite the dozens of eyewitnesses, not a single person ever came forward to identify the shooter or shooters. The town, as one entity, chose to subvert the legal system, exchanging the rule of law for a terrifying unspoken code of vigilantism. This is the darkness that defines Skidmore, Missouri, a murder hidden not by shadows, but by the absolute, unbroken, silent agreement of its citizens. To understand why the town collectively decided that murder was the only remaining option, one must first appreciate the depth and duration of the terror Ken Rex McElroy inflicted. Born Kenneth Rex McElroy in 1934, he was an imposing, larger-than-life figure, an illiterate hog farmer described as a big brute of a guy with slicked-back hair like Elvis. For over 2 decades, McElroy maintained a shocking reign of criminal terror across 4 counties in northwest Missouri. His rap sheet was long and horrifying, accumulating dozens of felonies. The nature of his crimes demonstrated extreme depravity and malicious intent, targeting the vulnerable and the innocent. His criminal history included assault, child molestation, statutory rape, involving his future wife Traina McLeod, arson, hog and cattle rustling, and burglary. He truly operated almost at will within the community, knowing he was largely immune to consequence. His brutality extended even to animals. He was known to have killed 2 dogs belonging to the McLeod family, highlighting his capacity for casual malice. The terror McElroy wielded was fundamentally based on the breakdown of the judicial system. Over the course of his life, he was indicted a staggering 21 times. Remarkably, he escaped conviction in 20 of those cases, maintaining a near-perfect record of impunity. This consistent legal failure was not due to clever criminal plotting, but rather a chilling reliance on crude, yet highly effective intimidation. McElroy was a brute, not a genius, but he was a master of psychological warfare. He would park his armed pickup truck outside the homes of witnesses, locking them in his unblinking stare, projecting the death that sat fixed behind his cold blue eyes. This perpetual threat paralyzed the entire institutional framework. As noted in the analysis of his criminal history, cops were scared to arrest him, prosecutors were scared to prosecute him, judges were scared to judge him, and juries were simply too scared to convict him. Every time the system failed to deliver justice, McElroy's power grew, rewarding his criminality and solidifying his status as an untouchable tyrant. The community reached an absolute conviction that the law was not just incompetent, but structurally incapable of protecting them. This chronic betrayal by the legal establishment created a dangerous moral vacuum in Skidmore, where self-preservation and desperate vigilantism began to replace adherence to the law. The decades of unchecked crime built a volatile resentment in Skidmore, but the final intolerable catalyst arrived with the attempted murder of 70-year-old grocer Ernest Bo Bowenkamp. In 1980, McElroy confronted the elderly man in the loading dock of his grocery store and shot him in the neck. This act of violence against a well-liked, vulnerable member of the community brought McElroy's reign to a crisis point. The subsequent legal proceedings offered a brief, deceptive sense of hope. McElroy was ultimately convicted of second-degree assault and sentenced to 2 years in prison. However, this momentary victory was immediately overshadowed by a judicial decision that the town viewed as the ultimate betrayal. McElroy was released on appeal bond pending his appeal, allowing the man who had terrorized the community for 20 years and who had just been convicted of shooting a beloved grocer to return home was seen as an unacceptable failure by the state. McElroy immediately weaponized his release. Instead of laying low, he doubled down on his campaign of harassment, specifically targeting Bowenkamp and others who had shown support for the victim or provided testimony, including the town's Church of Christ minister. The danger was no longer latent, it was immediate and personal. The apex of this brazen escalation occurred just days before his death, on June 30th, 1981, when McElroy appeared at the DG Tavern armed with a devastating military M1 Garand rifle and bayonet, openly threatening to kill Bowenkamp. This was the tipping point. McElroy had transitioned from being a feared bully to an individual openly issuing death warrants in public, confirming his belief that he was above all legal authority. The fact that he was shot and killed within a couple of days of being released on bond following this armed threat demonstrates the community's immediate organization. Skidmore realized they were not waiting for justice. They were waiting for the next victim. The local system had failed, and in the eyes of the residents, the only way to save Bowenkamp and the rest of the town from imminent and guaranteed violence was through direct, extrajudicial defense. The morning of July 10, 1981, began with a tense, urgent gathering at the Legion Hall. The townspeople convened with Nodaway County Sheriff Dan Estes to discuss how to finally protect themselves from the escalating menace of McElroy. As the meeting progressed, word arrived. McElroy and Trina were at the DG Tavern, sitting inside and drinking. The sheriff advised the assembled group against any direct confrontation and proposed the non-immediate solution of forming a neighborhood watch program. Critically, Sheriff Estes then drove out of town in his police cruiser. This timing, the removal of the highest legal authority just before the act, is viewed as a moment where law enforcement functionally abandoned the community, leaving the citizens to draw their own conclusions about their safety. The citizens did not take the sheriff's advice. They moved en masse toward the DG Tavern. The bar quickly filled with the angry and terrified residents of Skidmore. This collective convergence of 30 to 60 individuals was itself an organized maneuver, establishing a mutual presence that would ensure the eventual outcome and provide a defensive shroud of witnesses for anyone who might act. McElroy, seemingly oblivious to the unified menace surrounding him, finished his drinks, purchased a six-pack of beer, and walked out to his red pickup truck, where Trina was waiting. As McElroy sat in the driver's seat, perhaps smoking, the crowd outside became silent. Then the silence was shattered by a brutal burst of gunfire. McElroy was struck multiple times, dying in seconds. Forensic investigation later confirmed that the fatal shots came from at least 2 different firearms, one centerfire bullet and one rimfire bullet. The evidence of multiple weapons strongly suggests this was not an impulsive act by a single individual, but a coordinated execution involving a core group of townspeople, strategically ensuring that if one weapon failed, another would complete the task. The aftermath was grim and definitive. The sheer brutality of the attack was visible in the truck. Teeth and pieces of bone lay scattered on the dashboard. Blood splotched the seat and formed a deep puddle on the floor. Trina McElroy, covered in her husband's blood, scrambled out of the truck screaming. Yet despite the presence of dozens of people, the most chilling detail remains. No one called for an ambulance. The refusal to offer aid was the community's definitive stamp of approval on the execution. When retired Missouri State Highway Patrol Trooper Dan Boyer arrived, the crowd was either dispersing or remaining taciturn, offering the same robotic response to investigators. "I didn't see anything. I don't know what happened." The psychological solidarity of the crowd had established a flawless, unbreakable collective alibi, neutralizing the investigation before it even began. The murder of Ken McElroy immediately captured national and even international attention. Law enforcement, including the FBI, entered the investigation, with federal authorities exploring the possibility of a civil rights violation arising from vigilante action against a citizen. However, the institutional investigative efforts were entirely fruitless. Multiple grand juries were convened to hear testimony regarding the public execution, yet not a single indictment was ever issued for the murder. The collective refusal of the townspeople to cooperate successfully halted every avenue of legal inquiry. The physical evidence, the bullet wounds from multiple guns, was ultimately rendered meaningless by the psychological solidarity of the community. Skidmore's secret, the identity of the shooters, became a code that has been successfully maintained for over 40 years, a clear message that the town valued its peace, however violently obtained, above the precepts of the justice system that had failed them. The people of Skidmore largely concurred that McElroy got what he deserved, validating the decision to take justice into their own hands. The final legal ripple came in 1984, when Trainer McElroy filed a $5 million wrongful death lawsuit against the town of Skidmore, the county of Nodaway, and several individuals, including Del Clement, whom she openly accused of being the shooter. The suit was eventually settled out of court for $17,600, a negligible sum compared to the initial demand, with no party admitting guilt. This anticlimactic legal conclusion confirmed the town's victory. The vigilante justice was functionally upheld by the system's inability to punish it. Trainer later remarried and moved away, while many of the key figures in the story, including the grocer Bo Bowenkamp and the rancher accused of pulling the trigger, have since died, making the likelihood of any future indictment negligible. The murder of Ken McElroy is not merely an unsolved case. It is a profound, horrifying example of what happens when fear and failure erode the foundation of governance. Skidmore, Missouri, stands as a symbol of the dangerous ambiguity between justice and vengeance, proving that a sustained, collective lie can override official investigation. They achieved peace by embracing darkness, leaving behind a chilling legacy where the greatest darkness hid in plain sight, protected by an absolute and terrifying silence. The case of Ken McElroy forces us to look past the facts of the crime and confront the failures of the legal system, and the desperate measures citizens will take when all other hope is lost. We want to know what you think. Were the residents of Skidmore justified in their extreme actions, or did they commit a heinous, coordinated crime that should have led to accountability? Let us know your verdict in the comments below. If you are drawn to the darker corners of human history and the chilling ambiguities of unsolved crimes, hit that like button, subscribe to The Dark Silent, and ring that notification bell. We continue to dive deep into the mysteries where the search for truth never ends.